Brilliant. So I'm going to start, everyone, if you're ready.
Yeah.
So hello, everyone, and welcome here. My name is Isabel Parasram, and I'm really pleased to be hosting this session today. I just want to emphasise right from the start, this session is all about what it's like to be disabled in Britain in 2021. But it's not a politically geared event, even though we have got some politicians involved tonight. We're really focusing on the issue at hand that we really want to discuss in as much detail as we possibly can. So the speakers, out of respect for them, I just want to make sure that it's clear that they're not here because they represent or support any particular political ideology. You'll see on screen that we've got Zoe. She is a British Sign Language interpreter. She will be working with her partner, Rosie, and they will swap every 15 minutes just so that they're able to continue with some breaks in between. We also have a transcriber called Louise, and hopefully you're able to see on the Zoom page captions. If you're unable to see that, or it's more convenient for you, in the chat, there's a link so that you can click onto captioning just for yourself so that you can have it in a separate window and your Zoom screen on another window. And apparently that is much easier to use and it's faster. So please feel free to use that. The other thing is that for those who are visually impaired, we're unable to have attendees on screen because so many people have booked. And so hopefully you took advantage of sending in your questions and comments to Kevin, whose email was on the invitation. I know that some of you already have, but if you want to continue sending those in, even after the webinar, we'd really be pleased to have your contributions in. So I'm going to hand over now to Sir Ed Davey, who will introduce our session and also introduce you to our panelists.
Well, thank you, Isabel, and thank you all for coming tonight. One of the reasons I wanted to come at the start of this meeting is because for me, this is a really important event and extremely important that the Liberal Democrats hear from people, not just in our party, but from outside our party, about what it's like to be disabled in Britain in 2021. I'm sure other parties would say this, but we are totally committed to equality, totally to make sure that our party is diverse and treats people totally fairly with total equality, and understanding where our society and our country needs to do more is therefore extremely important. And that's why this is really important that we listen to you and understand about the lived experience of disabled people in Britain today. And I'm sure the discussion will cover everything from employment to health, from housing to transport to education to welfare benefits. There's a massive agenda. I think we need to do more in the Liberal Democrats than we've done in the past, and I'll explain briefly why. As a constituency MP in Kingston and served in South West London for 20 plus years, I've inevitably worked with a number of organisations representing disabled people, including obviously many led by disabled people who've been campaigning for a whole range of different things. It's been a real privilege to be part of that campaign and begin to see the world, particularly my own area, through their eyes and their lived experiences. But in 2008, I was delighted to have my first child born, and my lovely son, John, who's just behind me, the light of my life. He has an undiagnosed neurological condition, which means he can't walk or talk, and therefore has some major disabilities as well as some learning disabilities. And therefore, I see the world now through his eyes and the eyes of a parent, and that inevitably has changed my perspective. And this does mean this is a very clear issue, very, very close to my heart. And as a result of that, I got involved in a number of disability campaigns, not just locally, but nationally. I'm the patron of something called Disability Law Service, trying to help them and campaign with them. And on the board of something called Tourism for All, which aims to not just help people who are disabled to have much better leisure experiences, but also try to get the leisure and tourism industry to actually understand how wide the variety of different disabilities can be, and how they much should serve people far better than has been the case hitherto. There's lots of room for improvement there from the work I've already seen. So I'm really keen that the party engages in this issue. We have already had a huge amount of input from members of the public in describing what it's like for them to be disabled in Britain today. But I'm hoping that as a result of tonight's meeting and debate, we can go further forward. Although I'm not able to stay throughout the duration, it's a real fantastic that we've got such an amazing panel. Tanni Grey-Thompson hardly needs any introduction. I mean, what an amazing advocate and campaigner and role model. Tanni, thank you so much for joining. And those of us who watch you on the television competing and getting all your medals, it's a real delight that you've joined us today. Dan White, he and I were chatting a few weeks ago about some of the campaigns I'm running on carers, and Dan is an amazing campaigner on disability, on mental health, and on carers. And you know, through the caring that he's done from his award-winning disabled daughter Emily, he's become a real campaigner, a real advocate on all forms of media. And Dan, really great that you're here and giving us the benefit of your advice. And finally, I think it's finally, Isabel, you may tell me otherwise, but we've got Michelle Daley, Director of the Alliance for Inclusive Education, who's been involved in disability rights at the grassroots level for a number of years, working at the National Centre for Independent Living, in Primary Care Trust, and Disability Equality in Education. So amazing insights. And so huge thank you to Michelle for joining us tonight to give us the benefit of your insights. So Isabel, as I'm going to have to go very shortly, over to you to finish chairing, but very excited that you're putting this on tonight. It's really important for the party to really listen and see what we can do to join with others, both cross-party and outside politics, to campaign to make sure we get the equality we want.
Thank you so much, Ed. And I know this is a subject very close to your heart, so we appreciate you being here. Thank you. And so I'm going to hand over now just briefly to Gemma. If you'd like to introduce yourself and explain what you'll be doing here tonight, that'll be fantastic. Gemma is co-chairing alongside me.
Hi everyone, my name is Gemma and I am a director of Surrey Coalition of Disabled People, and I have been for, I think, 10 years, maybe a little bit more, maybe a bit less, but gives you an idea. A bit like Dan, I've been campaigning on disability issues virtually ever since I became a carer, and I've been aware of disability issues through my father, and then also now through my children from when they were born, and having to fight through the education system to get the education that they desperately needed. The reason why I'm here is I'm going to look at, keep an eye on the chat and also the Q&A, and then if there's any questions or any comments that might be pertinent, I will bring them up later.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Gemma. Much appreciated. I just wanted to give everyone an idea of what to expect tonight. So I'm going to start with a question or two just to get to know the panel on a professional level, and then we're going to go to the Q&A. We have had some questions come in and comments, etc. already. And after the Q&A, just towards the end, I'll just ask a question or two again, just to get to know the panel on a personal level. Just some of the kind of housekeeping, just to go over that. I've put it in the chat already, but for those who are currently joining, we are recording this event and it will be posted on the internet. So I will only use first names, or I'll endeavour to ensure that I do that. We may be discussing subjects that could be distressing or create situations that you need to explore further. And I'm hoping that my team will put suitable links in the chat for sources of help and guidance that you can seek afterwards. We can't control the chat, however, and so please be aware of that as you're reading through it. If anybody is abusive or disruptive, I'm equally hoping that my team are able to step in, but hopefully we won't have any of that tonight. I'm really pleased to welcome everyone here. We've got representatives from all sorts of organisations, including public services, charities, we've got thought leaders, we've got accountancy firms, media organisations, trade unions, all represented here tonight. So really pleased to have you. Even if you don't represent an organisation, you're really welcome here as an individual. We have got questions already coming in, I can see that. If you submit your questions and comments in the chat, that would be great. You might receive a response in the chat from one of my team, or we may be able to use your question or comment as part of the discussion. But realistically, we can't get through all of them. So what we're going to do is take all of the unaddressed questions and comments as best we can, and we will collate them and share them afterwards. I might direct my questions to just one speaker so that we are able to get through a lot more material. And speakers, if you could be aware that your answers, if you could keep them very focused, that would be great, because we have so much content to go through. If you're not speaking, please mute your microphones, and be aware that for the audience, I may break eye contact because I'm looking through my notes potentially. And so might our speakers be all writing things down. So that may well be something that happens. So what we will do now is just begin. If I may, and I just wanted to ask each panelist, out of interest, and also by way of introducing yourself and talking about the things that you do, if you were not here tonight, what would you have been doing? And I will start with Michelle, because you're smiling at me.
That's a good question. Possibly watching TV. Possibly doing that. I'm not sure what I'd be watching, but maybe flicking through the channels. So I'll introduce myself while I say that. So yeah, I'm an older person, so I must be flicking through the channels, and then if not, go to I might like to say TV brands that I might look at. I don't know. Are we allowed to do that, Isabel?
Yep, sure. And what sort of thing would you be watching, or what do you enjoy, Michelle?
I like documentaries. I like watching documentaries. I like a bit of documentary. I like some comedy. I think that's fun. Or if not, I do like to play Scrabble. So if anyone's up for a challenge of Scrabble, please engage with me. I love it. It's the best game ever. You know, and I like playing pool. I like it all online. So that's who I am. I do like online games. I do like Scrabble. Yeah.
Well, Dan put his thumbs up, so I think that you've got a challenger for Scrabble at least. Tanni, what would you be doing tonight?
I definitely wouldn't be playing Scrabble. I'm the master of 4-letter words, but no more than that. I'd probably just be on another Zoom call. I mean, it's amazing how we've sort of gone from, actually a lot of companies being inflexible and not allowing disabled people a huge amount of opportunity to work from home, and then non-disabled people want it, and suddenly it's all happened. And that probably is a bit of a grumpy start to it, but it has been amazing how we've gone online. But my life is usually from 9 o'clock in the morning till about 11 o'clock at night on Zoom meetings. And words I never thought I would say is online House of Lords. I mean, in an institution that's sort of been there for 900 years and the rules haven't changed for 400 years, did I ever think we would go online? Not in a million years. And possibly the most surreal thing that's happened to me recently was some of my colleagues have some very expensive paintings on their walls, not all of them, and we had to blur our backgrounds. So we had a message saying we had to blur our backgrounds, and I was in a meeting and somebody said, "Is that a Kandinsky behind you?" And it's like, well, no, it's from B&Q, because if it was a Kandinsky, I probably wouldn't be in this call. I'd be in the Bahamas. But yeah, I'm just online all the time, and it's great, but it's also just exhausting.
Yeah, that's probably a true reflection for many people, Tanni, so thank you for that. I would probably actually be sitting with 3 of my children having dinner, and with one of them I'd be trying desperately to usher him to an online meeting that he's meant to be in actually right now, but I can't do that. So if my son is watching, you've got away with it tonight. So Dan, what would you have been doing tonight?
What I've been doing, I would probably mostly be helping Emily out creating Sims in her room. She's doing fiercely at the moment, creating new LGBT characters for her Sims. Other than that, I just find it really hard to switch off. Now I'm wonderfully working for Intent Health and the Disability Union, as well as the campaigning and the comic work. I just constantly can't switch off. So I'd rather have a laptop or phone and be constantly tweeting constantly trying to arrange a podcast or something like that. But yeah, I could play Scrabble. I'm very good at words like at and in and on. So yeah, Michelle, game on. Yeah, game on.
Ed, you're having a real laugh tonight. I don't think I've ever seen you laugh so much. This
No,
is
I mean,
very much entertainment.
well, I just thought what Tanni said about the House of Lords was brilliant. I'll remember that. I'm going to pass it on, Tanni. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Ed. So I'm going to move on now to some of the questions, and I just wanted to address a couple of things that came up head on, because it's feedback that I've had, and I just want to acknowledge that people have written in to say these things. So one of them is about disability versus carers. And so I did have some feedback about wanting the focus of tonight's session to be on disabled people, as opposed to carers. And there was some concern about whether the panelists themselves were disabled or had lived experiences of disability. So I will link that to something that Phoebe's sent in by an audio submission. And this was about patronising behaviour. She said, "I feel like I have to fight for my right to be heard, for people to talk to me instead of my carer." So could you just talk to that, please? Partly about the feedback and partly about what Phoebe's has said. Tanni, I'll go to you because you were nodding.
Yeah, I'm just constantly exhausted by the voice of disabled people being lost in anything, actually. So, you know, the compulsory do not resuscitate orders that came out the start of the pandemic got very little media attention. You know, the figures for, 60%, and there's a lot of intersectionality of the people who've died from COVID, but, 60% were disabled. Those figures have been out for months, and it was only in the last couple of weeks that there's been much attention paid to it. And I just think it's, I'm working on domestic abuse legislation at the moment. And, we had a victory on Monday where some bits for disabled people were included, but some of the politics that went on last night, we were told that including disabled people in domestic abuse legislation would make it very confusing for people to understand domestic abuse legislation. And we're kind of 20% of the population. And so it is just really hard. And I admit I struggle because, if I hear one more non-disabled person tell me 2012 changed the world, I'm like, COVID's meant me, I'm completely over being polite to people anymore, because 2012 was an amazing Paralympic Games. It was really cool. It will be the best Paralympic Games for a very long time to come. And it changed a couple of Paralympians' lives. It didn't change disabled people's lives. And, last week we heard the European Space Agency are going to send a disabled person into space. And they went to the IPC, the International Paralympic Committee. Now, surely they should go to actually an organisation that has people part of it that have science or astrophysics PhDs. But to me, that just highlights the fact that, disabled people in education, in work, you name it, they're not there. And having said all that, there is actually an American amputee Paralympian who's got degrees in maths, physics and engineering, and has worked at NASA and CERN. But, the space agencies don't go to the Olympic Committee to find, astronauts, and they're going to come all paranaut. It's like, seriously. So I'm just I guess just what COVID's done is just the sense of frustration has just built up and up and up. And I'm slightly tired of people coming to me for an opinion on anything, even though I'm sitting here tonight. What I try and do is find lots of other disabled voices, because, as much as I have an opinion on everything, a lot of those opinions shouldn't be public. And, I'm not the person to speak to on a lot of these things. So I do just massively worry that, what do we have to do? What is going to be our moment in time when the world wakes up and sees how many disabled people are out there, and the level of discrimination that they're facing? I don't know what that moment in time is.
Thank you, Tanni, and we really appreciate you being here tonight. We are so grateful that we managed to book you and a couple of other amazing speakers. And Dan, so I know that I've had comment about you being a carer and somebody who doesn't have lived experience of disability. Could you just put that right for those who are attending, please? That would be great.
Yes, certainly. As a majority of people know, I care for my daughter Emily, who's has spina bifida, uses a wheelchair. She also has Chiari malformation hydrocephalus. Yeah, I care for her, and I've been caring for my wife predominantly this year, who's had a slip disc, so she's been out of action. But yeah, there has been a lot of discourse around carers speaking on behalf of their carees. I mean, that's entirely people's viewpoints. I mean, that's fair enough. But from my point of view, there's always that association of people not recognising the hidden disabilities that carers often have. I mean, I am at the present, and I'm still undiagnosed autistic. I have bipolar disorder, anxiety, body dysmorphia. The list is endless. But unfortunately, it is the system that creates pressure on carers, and that's why carers need to speak. The system doesn't always allow our children to speak. And by that, I mean the system and the media in general are still stuck in their post-war stereotypes of what disabled children can do and the category they came under. We're still living in a society where children are victims. We're still living in a society where children are wheelchair bound. We're still living in a society, and unfortunately children in need is at great fault of this, of seeing them purely as victims of just a disability rather than championing everything that they can do. So until we readdress in the media and in a lot of the political lines about what disabled children can do and what their wills and wants are, and unfortunately it is going to fall, unfortunately, to carers like myself to champion their voices. We're not trying to overrun the disabled community. We want to work with the disabled community. I've just started work for the Disability Union, whose cry out call is to work with carers, to work with disabled people, to work with everyone, because we are one huge community, and only by working together can we pick up, like Tanni said, pick up that flame from the Paralympic Games that was extinguished very rapidly afterwards, pick that up and collectively move on to make change. We're only going to do it by working together. That's the only way we're going to do it.
Thanks, Dan. I know that Ed wants to make a quick point, and as you're leaving, Ed, I'll let you have the floor.
Sorry, I just wanted to come in this because people may know I'm doing a lot of work on campaigning for carers, but I want to make it really clear, crystal clear, that I do not see campaigning for carers in any conflict with campaigning for the rights of disabled people, and particularly for disabled voices to be heard. And I can just put this in my own personal context with respect to my son who can't talk. And my wife's desire for John is for him to have the maximum independence he possibly can. And we fight for it every day. And we fight to make sure people listen to him, even though he finds talking extraordinarily difficult. And if we had taken the advice of a lot of the health and care professionals, who I regard very highly, but if we'd taken their advice, my son would be much less independent than he is at the moment. And he's still not that independent at all. But I want his voice to be heard, even though he can't speak. I want to talk to my son. I want to understand what he's thinking, what he's feeling. His independence is my goal. And so carers and disabled people are on the same side. And I know there'll be some disabled people who don't need carers, and we need to help them and give them the support so they don't need anyone intervening. There's a whole spectrum here, isn't there not? But that's one of the reasons I'm so pleased this event is happening, so we can hear those different voices and making sure that the Liberal Democrats can reflect all the different voices, all the different experiences of disabled people that must vary so much. When we were working for Tourism For All, when I was attending some of their meetings, less able to now, we were doing training videos to help the different organizations who we were trying to improve their performance. And we had a whole set of different videos to train their staff to recognize visible disabilities and invisible disabilities, a whole range of things, so that they could really get their staff to really understand and listen to disabled people and respond to them. And I think as a society, we've got a long way to go. And the experience, my experience of being a parent of my wonderful John is anything to go by. I can tell you, from my point of view, we've got a chasm to go over. There's so much to do, and we've got a massive cultural change we need to make. So I'm sorry I've got to go, but I just want to say that I see no conflict between carers and standing up for carers and standing up for disabled people. Indeed, I think people who are doing the best caring jobs understand you can only do a job of a carer if you are listening and helping the person you're caring for to be as independent as they possibly can be. And you do that by listening and helping them to be themselves. So I've got to go.
Excellent.
But I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care.
Thank you.
Michelle, can I come to you now, please, with commentary on that?
Yeah, I've just reflected on the points that have been mentioned. And if I sound passionate, it's because I'm passionate on this topic. But I do think there's something which is quite deep about this. It's about segregation. And it's also about the fact that disabled people are segregated from society. And there's also the fact that there's how disabled people identify. We're hearing different languages, people with disability, we're hearing disabled people, and we're also hearing issues around care and different languages. So I think they're problematic, they're huge problems. So just going back to the question you asked, so the person was saying it's all about their voice not being heard. Your voice is not heard because disabled people generally are locked from society. And we use different words and languages to mask disabled people's interaction with society. And the other issue is about, Ed said about care and independence. I can't remember, I'm not going to misquote him, but there needs to be a drive to recognise so people can have independence, and we can have independence through PAs, personal assistants. The problem is the way the system is structured, the structures, and it's about recognising the problems in that. Because of segregation, because disabled people, there's the issue around access to mainstream education, disabled people have to fight, campaign to get into mainstream education, the barriers and the structural barriers, the attitudinal barriers. And also the other issue is around the failure to recognise disableism. We rarely hear the word disableism. We really hear when somebody is experienced a barrier that is disableism. And these are some of the major problems that we have. So if we had in our legislations clear definitions around what disableism is, the failure to treat disabled people with respect, the failure when disabled people are being locked out of whatever it may be, whatever barrier it may be, is disableism. We need to name these issues and we need to call them out for what they are. And we also need to not mask segregation under auspices of care or whatever it may be, where a disabled person approaches someone and they get put in a care institution. I could go on, but I think there are a number of issues what's going on here. And I think we need to be clear what we're talking about. We, disabled people, are campaigning to end disability barriers. So we experience disability. We don't have disabilities under the social model. So it's about us saying we want those barriers that shut us out from society to be removed. And also everybody wants independence, but independence is blocked for the way the structures and the gatekeepers that shut that. So more resources and lots of resources and money have been put into having people shut away from society. So the issue is, I think we need to be naming disableism and the barriers that shut us out of society.
Hang on.
Oh, Isabel's gone.
Yes.
Hope we haven't frightened her off.
I hope not. Right.
It's probably the shirt.
Right. It's a pity I didn't get a chance to say this in front of Ed, but one of the comments was the message. I didn't quite catch who said it, but I apologise. The give a carers a break message is hurtful. that was from Alexandria, I think. The PIP process is demeaning, which I know which I haven't covered yet. Not all disabled people have carers. Some disabled people, like Dan and I, are also carers. So we see it from both sides. And then this is a good one, I think. Can people of influence, when they go to places, leisure centres or whatever, ask what facilities, if they have any, they have for disabled people? Because Alan thinks that will probably be the only way that they'll increase the idea that they've got to do things to improve things.
No, that is tricky on that front. I hope you don't mind me butting in, but yeah, the amount of times that we've been with groups of disabled people who've asked that thing, we've asked that thing, no doubt Tanni and Misha have asked the same thing. The problem lies in that when we're living in 2021, and only now are we promised changing places to be built and all new facilities, but where are disabled people when it comes to architectural design to actually implement access to places? Places are still being built without disabled people being involved in that process. Disabled people are contributing towards the economy of the country. Disabled people want to spend money, the Purple Pound, for instance, and it's still being shut out from leisure centres, from playgrounds, from schools, from businesses, from hotels. It's indiscriminate and it's offensive in a first world country like this. This is still going on. I can't take Emily swimming because the hoist is broken and they won't be able to fix it for 3 weeks. That's not on. I can't take Emily into a shop because there's 3 steps. Even a charity shop has steps and there's no ramp to get her in. This is 2021, and there's still no disabled group are being asked personally to be involved in structural design and architecture, and that really does annoy me. I've taught myself hoarse, and I expect Tanni has, and Michelle and everyone else who's on the chat has done exactly the same thing. We can't keep having these same conversations over and over and over again.
You look, I mean, I know there's a question that's popped up about education, and I was unbelievable. So the age I'm 51, I could walk a little bit, so I got into mainstream school, and then I had no automatic right to go to mainstream school, but my dad used legislation that was pushed by Mary Warnock, Baroness Warnock, and threatened to sue Secretary of State for Wales over my right to go to mainstream school. Now, a lot of parents don't you're fighting a million different things, and I was really lucky that my dad was able to kind of take on that fight. But if you look at, again, back to where Voice Lost, Academies legislation, which was only passed a couple of years ago, actually allows head teachers to remove disabled children from their schools. And nobody, lots of people try to fight it. The stuff we're doing on domestic abuse, where we were last night, the government had accepted an amendment but said, actually, if we try to push ours to try and get disabled people included in domestic abuse, then we'd lose some of the other things. So we're always like a bargaining chip.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Part M needs updating, and so Part M of the building regs and stuff. So it does sort of feel a bit at the minute like it's continuously, there's not one thing to fight. And I normally tweet a lot about trains and my really bad experience on trains, because it just kind of cheers me up, to be honest. And it's about getting it out to just a much wider audience about the ableism that people face. We were promised in the Disability Discrimination Act that January the 1st last year trains would be accessible, and last year I was told it's 2070. I could be dead. And somebody said, oh, you just need to be a bit patient. Now I'm kind of, so the trouble is, it's like there's not one thing to fix. It's like you're fighting it. Every bit of legislation that comes through, there's unforeseen consequences, and then stuff that you miss, and it just feels to me we need a moment to get everyone to stop and realise how ableist they're being. But what that is, I don't know.
I know you're exactly right. You thought COVID would have been that. COVID should have been that moment. I mean, reading today that disabled children are proportionally now more prone to dying of COVID than their peers. Like you said, it's 60% of people who died of COVID of disability. I've tried tooth and nail to push this into the media's attention through my networks for the past 2 months, tooth and nail, and no one's picked it up. No one wants to hear it. So if this is not our moment for appeal to be heard, I don't know what it's going to take. What do you think, Misha? What do you think is going to be our big moment?
I I just want to pick up on a point before I come to your bit, Dan, about what Tanni made about education. And you're so right about people being shut out of education. So Alfie done a piece of research, and we launched it last year, January, and we looked at the school accessibility plans. And we researched over 200 teachers and various professionals and students. And what we found within that research was that schools, rather than using the accessibility plans to say, come in, we'll let you in for the, we're welcoming and we're removing these barriers. No, these school accessibility plans were used to drive disabled children away. That's a major problem we're having. So rather than tools and policies and procedures being in place to support the inclusion of disabled people, they're doing the reverse. They're doing the massive reverse. And they're doing the reverse because there's no enforcement of them. And we're asking people to go around and police when actually we need the institutions to police the systems. We can't be saying to people, police things which is go do other people's job. We need everybody's responsibility to ensure that we include everybody. So I guess the conversation tonight is going to be speaking about how do we include. I think there's a lot being learned from COVID. There's a huge amount being learned from COVID. A lot being learned. All of our freedom has been taken away. We've all been told that we have to, restricted movement. But what we're forgetting is that this has been the experience for many disabled people's lives, repeatedly. 15 minutes popping, disabled people locked, and we shouldn't be gentle with language, locked in institutions, time slots when they have visitors, children not having access to schools when that's a human right, not access to education. And the list goes on and on. We know this through Alfie because we're seeing this every single day in our work. We're seeing parents just not know what to do. Parents are being turned away from all types of school. And it's not that, we also have to accept, it's not that inclusion don't work. We hear that again and again and again. Inclusive education doesn't work. It's not suitable for my child. That's a load of whatever. It's not true. The reality is that the resources have been directed to support segregation, segregated education. But also the government departments are not working together to make sure inclusive education works. We signed the UN Convention on the Rights of Disabled People, and we have not implemented it into our domestic laws. That's a massive problem. Why? We can't talk about inclusive society when the liberations of disabled people are not included. We can't talk about inclusive society when there's so much injustice within our system. And we can't talk about inclusive society when we talk about intersectionality, when intersectionality doesn't include disabled people.
Michelle, thank you for that. Thank you. I don't know where we're at because my computer completely froze. So it seems like when I came back, nobody even noticed. So I think you're doing.
We did miss you. We did miss you. You sort of like went and vanished.
Why didn't I freeze in one of those poses that was actually complimentary to me? But Gemma, do you have anything that you want to highlight in the chat at all? I've seen quite a few things.
It's quite. I mean, when you were gone, I did pick up some of the things that I'd written down from the chat. So that's why we sort of were talking about access, people with influence going to places and saying, what facilities, if any, do you have for disabled people? And someone said, why is it that 40% of stations are not accessible? Disabled people want to be able to go to their local station, just like an old disabled person does, without blinking an eye.
Gemma, as you've raised that, I might then raise something that somebody mentioned, somebody who messaged in on Twitter called Helena. And she said, we have had our only fully accessible and multifunctional swimming pool closed. Does anybody have a comment about that and an experience that they can raise in relation to that?
What, do you know why it was closed? So just
If you
cuts again?
It was she was only allowed 240 characters on Twitter. So
Oh, of course, yeah. No doubt it was down to local cuts again, because we know most of the local councils are on the verge of bankruptcy as you speak, so they're cutting here and there, but they're always cutting here and there in the wrong place. Unfortunately, they're always cutting off access to the people who really need it most. And like I was saying before you were cut off, used to take Emily swimming, but there was only one pool locally with a hoist, and when the hoist was broken, it would take the engineer a good 3 to 4 weeks to come out and fix it. And you just get tired of standing there with your child with you, just moaning at people simply because my child can't go in the water and get wet. But I think a lot of it's to do with cuts, but it's also always this community that bears the brunt of these cuts. You can see it right across the board. Absolutely disgraceful.
Physical activity is not a statutory provision by local authorities. So when they're struggling, and you look at the Care Act easements that came in the coronavirus legislation, and some places have used that as a reason to cut care packages and things like that. So I do feel sorry for local authorities in terms of trying to balance books. Swimming pools are really expensive to run, but again, it's disabled people that get hit. So I'd love to see physical activity be statutory provision, because actually it's good for everybody. Well, for the vast majority of people, there are people who will struggle, but actually being active is incredibly important. But yeah, it's not going to get any easier. I mean, that's the reality. I mean, by now we would have expected a new welfare reform bill. We should, would have had one by now. If you thought 2012 welfare reform and austerity was brutal, whatever's coming is going to be even harder. And actually, what I'd say, I mean, what was really useful, there was an amazing group of different disability rights campaigners in 2012 who watched every single minute of the debates in both houses, and we're sending kind of messages and emails and support and documents, and we kind of need people on the outside watching what's going on, and sending their views in, writing letters, because they kind of do work, certainly to peers they do, because what's coming through, well, whenever we don't have a bill yet, but we will, whatever's going to come is going to be pretty tough.
yeah,
Just
thanks.
add to your point.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just to add to Tanni's point, good point. And the other issue is that physical activities are often seen as medical intervention for disabled people. So if it's a medical intervention, then it's not seen as inclusive and being part of society. And I think we need to recognise that.
Yeah, Oliver's put a little advert for Aspire in Stanmore. He says that they've got a ramp into the pool, ... amazing. So yeah, and Kathy points out that all pools are closed at the moment because of COVID. But she says that the local pool won't reopen on the 12th of April because it needs repairs, which are taking a long time. So yeah, I won't name the local authority that Helena wrote in about, but it's very disappointing for her and others within her circle, to say the least. That would be an underestimation. So I just wanted to move on now to something that Mel pointed out. So Mel sent in a video submission in advance, and what she said, I hope you're watching, Mel, thank you for that. She said, being disabled in Britain means facing stigma around employment. Since 2010, government rhetoric about a pro-work society ignores policy problems surrounding disabled people accessing the labour market. And I know that, Dan, you've recently got a key role actually within, is it Disability Union, if I got that right? So do you want to start? And if you speakers could keep your comments as brief as possible, just because we have a long list of questions to get through, so we're trying to cover a lot of topics.
Yeah, absolutely no problem at all. The government incentive of trying to force disabled people into work is something that is extremely tiresome. There's no provision I find, or we find, from the potential employee that when they get to their workplace, there's any access for them there at all. No one seems to thought of things like low-level lighting, or quiet areas, or ramps, or things like that, or accessible tech. It seems to be a shoehorn effect of trying to get people off PIP, off DLA, into work without any thought of what they're actually going to do when they go there. Plus, there's also this insinuation that everyone has to work. That's not everyone has to work. Not everyone can work. That's the thing. Some people do need to be supported, and as a society, where every life you would think was made to be equal, everyone should have the right to be fully supported. So if you're going to go to work, you should have the right to be supported completely and utterly. Your employer should allow you time off for physio, for doctor's appointments, for hospital appointments, whatever you need. It needs to be written in stone that access and just forward thinking will be there for an employee. But like I said, not everyone has to work. Not everyone should have to work.
Out of interest, Dan, though, what happens if your employer doesn't provide those things?
It should be discriminatory thing. I don't. Tanni, we had to help me out on this on the legislation, but I don't. It should be discrimination. If you're, say, for Emily was to go to work, she's very autistic. She has a wheelchair. She can't actually get into the building, or actually does get into the building. The noise levels are really, really high, and she has a meltdown. Is anyone there with disability training to help her out? Is this going to happen? If she's sacked, is it a discriminatory thing? It just seems to be half-hearted, shoehorn effect for the whole community just to get into work. And it's the same with carers, just penalised all the time for non-working.
Go ahead, Tammy. I can see you've got a response for Dan.
Yeah, no, I mean, it should be compulsory for businesses to publish their disability figures, and not to be able to widen the definition of disability to be so wide that it includes somebody with a very short-term condition. So there should be reasonable adjustments applied to lots of different people, but I've seen a number of businesses where they've just redefined the definition and their figures have gone from 2% to 18%, but not employing anyone different. So I sort of get why they've done it, but it doesn't really help. And so discrimination can happen in loads of different ways. You know, it can be actually just not getting an interview, or if somebody's given a job, you can just make sure that their desk is as far away from the accessible toilet as it possibly can be. You know, there's lots of different barriers that can be put into place. But for me, it's got to measure pay gap. It's got to be disability figures, and it should be enforceable. Unfortunately, a lot of companies can get away with this by playing games.
Yeah, Lucy has said in the chat, legally, yes, but realistically, it doesn't happen. And she summed it up, really, hasn't she? Michelle, did you want to comment?
Yeah, just to add, I think there's a number of important factors here. I think one is the issue around reasonable adjustment. It's subjective, and as Tanni said, is that employers use that to their best advantage, and I'm saying best advantage, meaning that, and that is problematic. And there's another issue is issues around access to work. It's not always, a lot of disabled people call it the best government's best kept secret. Access to work is to support disabled people in employment and ensure that all the barriers that are in place are removed. And I know Tanni has quoted on some of her experiences around using access to work and the problems with that. And many disabled people have had lots and lots of issues with access to work. And the other issue is the recruitment processes. Some of the criteria that are expected, are they really needed? And it's literally written in a way to sometimes drive disabled people away from jobs. They're intentionally, in many ways, written so that disabled people don't apply. So there's a lots and lots of issues what are going on. So it's not surprising disabled people are low in the job market. It's not that disabled people can't do it. We know now over COVID, through using platforms such as this, disabled people have been asking for years for flexible working. What are we doing now? Flexible working. So we know it can happen. We know it's happening. It's happening well. I'm not saying this platform works for everybody, but we do need, when we come out of lockdown, to have some more blended ways of working. This is what disabled people have been asking for years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can say, my day job is being head of a barrister's chambers, and sometimes I've represented disabled people in terms of discrimination, and I can say how very difficult it has been to be able to bring claims and then to pursue them, because litigation costs money. It's incredibly stressful. It's a long-term thing. And, I try as best I can with most of my clients to encourage them to settle if that's ever possible or the best course for them, partly because litigation is not the route that people really would want to be going through, far less for having the barriers that disabled people have to face on many, many levels. So I have every sympathy for that position. I just wanted to raise a point that Adam sent in by video submission. And actually, his point was about education, and I really wanted to highlight, his brilliant background. But let me read to you his story. He said, "I have Asperger's syndrome. I was excluded from school 3 times by the age of 13. I was fortunate enough to go to a pupil referral unit, which helped me to get on in life, and I ended up getting a master's degree." And then I paraphrased a bit and went straight to the bit where he said, "I want to be a shining example of what people can do with their disabilities." So if you're in the audience, Adam, well done and congratulations. But something that I didn't include, which I will now, is that Adam has a master's degree. He's got a job as a payroll assistant, and he says that the job is really not, it's not commensurate with his master's degree. And his submission to us was incredibly lucid, very logical, very articulate, very intelligent, all of those things. And yet he has constantly found it very difficult to get the kind of role that he wants. Does anybody have any experience similar or any commentary on that?
I'm happy to come in and then people can bounce off of it. All credit to Adam, and my response is not a criticism to Adam in no way, but we have to recognise that pupil referral units are segregated education placements, and we also know that pupil referral units are pipelines to prisons for many people. The statistics are extremely, extremely, extremely high, and we also know that many people who end up in a pupil referral unit end up being deeply segregated from society. So whilst Adam's had a good experience, they're not the true reality for many, 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 many disabled people. And they reinforce segregated practices within society. People who end up, young people who end up in pupil referral units, we hear stories of what goes on and how disabled people are being segregated. And we also know lots of money is spent on resourcing pupil referral units. And the sad reality is that while Adam defines himself as a successful outcome, and that is not what my response is about, my response is always about that we shouldn't be supporting segregated practices. So this is not a negative comment on Adam, or hats off to Adam, but the reality that what we see and what we know, the statistics are there. And we know that many people who end up in the criminal justice system have come out of pupil referral units. So I just want to make that point that we need to recognise, and I do think there needs to be some serious work to end pupil referral units. Not just but we can't have systems that result in segregation of people.
That's really interesting, Michelle, because there was a fair amount of controversy over even exploring this topic of whether disabled children ought to access mainstream education or whether there ought to be special schools, etc., etc. And so it's helpful to hear your perspective, but I know that a few people might disagree with you. So thank you for that. Did Dan or Tanni, do you want to comment?
Oh, I think Michelle put it succinctly on that one.
I was just going to say, sadly, his experience is not. It's not the unusual one, it's the majority experience in terms of you have to have so many more qualifications to get into work, staying in work. That is the sad reality of life as a disabled person. So it's just, and I agree with myself, segregation is just, if you grow up just being so used to segregation, then you think that is your life. And, I've got a lot of friends who, similar age to me, born with their impairment, and you're just, and actually for me, lockdowns, this is the bit that I didn't realize how much daily resilience I had to have to live with all the ableism I face. And, I kind of used to be sort of slightly blasé about it, to be honest, until not actually being in contact with idiots every single day, it made me realize what it was like. And so it is really difficult to fight your way out of it, because you can't just leave and go and get another job. And I was talking to a company recently, and it's not their job to fix some of this, but where they're based in London, saying, where's the nearest accessible tube station? It's like 3 miles away. And, you know, where can you get something to eat around where the building is? Well, half the cafes are not accessible, or and so there wasn't the understanding of actually how hard it can be, not for everyone, but how hard it can be to get into work and to do this and then do your job and then get home again. You know, London as well, you know, to live near an accessible tube station, really expensive. I live in the northeast of England, you know, look like really, and all these different things. Just layer on layer. You talk about one thing and it's may not seem a problem to some people, but you just layer and layer it all the time.
Thanks, Tanni. And thank you, Michelle, for underlining that admin work is crucial. I have to say, I am a great fan of payroll assistants. I was one in my early career. So I know the job is invaluable and the work is very, very, very important in any company. So
you mentioned something at the end, and you said that there will be different views in Alfie's perspective and my perspective around education, inclusive or mainstream. And I would always ask people, do you believe in inclusive societies? And if someone believes in inclusive societies, where then does segregation fit in?
Yeah, thanks for that, Michelle. You have raised something about transport, Tanni. So I'm going to go to a written submission that was sent in to us via email from Bill. And I am aware that there are some questions in the chat, so we will come to those afterwards, but as Tanni has raised it. So Bill has written in and said, as a wheelchair user, many issues arise. There are few step-free underground stations, stores that have a step into them, and there are cars that park on dropped curbs, as well as meetings being held in inaccessible places. So could we have a little chat about that particular issue? That would be really helpful. I'll start with Dan.
Yeah, cool. No worries. Yeah, access has got to be probably one of the most pivotal things. I mean, especially for Emily, taking Emily's point of view, I can't take her on a train at all because there's nowhere near us in Fareham, Hampshire, that she can actually access a train at all. Most of the pavements around here have cars parked on them, even on drop-down curbs. It seems to be that people don't realise, and that brings us back again to the mantra of an inclusive society, that we don't tend to think about other people, just tend to think of ourselves and an able-bodied point of view. So that I can't take Emily on a bus because none of the buses have a drop-down lip. I mean, I understand last year there was legislation to prevent cars from parking on the pavement. I don't know what's happened to that, but I'm still finding it from my point of view and from all the people who contact me from that point of view, they just literally cannot access anything unless, like Tanni said, you happen to live within a 5-mile radius or something you can access. But that's appalling. That's absolutely appalling in this day and age. You disabled people just cannot get in. It's just physically the act of getting into somewhere or getting transport. How can it actually still be a thing all these years later? And it makes you wonder, going back to what I was saying initially, where is Justin Tomlinson when all this is going on? All these debates we're having, this is all legislation, this is all government legislation. Where is Justin Tomlinson when all this is going on? Where's he been, in fact, since the start of the pandemic? I just want to know where he's been and what's going on and what will be the future for access, because at the minute I cannot see it changing because we're not bringing disabled people into that conversation about making accessible transport and buildings. Is still not happening. So these things are still not being looked at.
Thanks, Dan. Tanni, I've heard you speak on this in the past, so please do share your views.
I say this quite a lot. I just want the same miserable experience of commuting as everyone else. I don't even get close to the same miserable experience of commuting as everyone else. So, you know, every successive government since the mid-90s have allowed derogations to allow trains, you know, to be procured that, you know, aren't low. I mean, there's loads of things behind that. We've actually got a group, Campaign for Level Boarding, which is on Twitter, bit of a plug. Follow them because we're trying to bring together we've got quite a large group of disabled people, all different impairments, different experiences, to campaign in different ways to ask for it. But you know, the lifts that went in at King's Cross, which have made, you know, that station accessible to the tube, 180 million. You know, so I think Green Park was 120. I might have got the figures wrong, but you're talking, you know, 100+ million for each of those tube stations. So it comes back to, is this a price that people want to pay or are willing to pay? Or, you know, and I think it should be, because it's not just about me as a wheelchair user, it's actually about making it better for older people, for prams, you know, people pushing prams, you know, but it's always just slipped away. And I sat on the board of Transport for London, and you know, the team there were doing an awful lot of work in terms of the budgets and what they do, and we're trying to be really sensible about where the money went. But I think I sat in I don't know how many meetings, and the point it changed from the people I was sitting in a meeting with was, I got a tube map, paper tube map, got a Sharpie pen, crossed out TfL and put Tanni's tube map, and then crossed out every station I couldn't use, and then sat with them and said, well, yeah, that station's great, but I have no desire, I won't know, to go to that part of London. I have no reason ever to go to that part of London. So then I crossed out all the stations that I didn't ever not want to go, but you know what I mean, where there was no need for me to go there. And it was left with a tiny number of stations. So I think it's just trying to figure out the levers to, and there aren't always them, but to get people to think different. But if we don't do something about trains now, it's never going to change. And we can't, it just keeps getting battered. So HS2, if anyone likes to join our campaign to get HS2, whether you agree with HS2 or not, I don't know the answer to that. But, you know, there's a chance that a massive chunk of that won't be step free. And that's new stuff. There is no excuse. And then we've got to sort buses, and we've got to sort, you know, and then toilets on trains, and toilets at train stations, and staff training. And, you know, a big frustration, a lot of us been told there's a new app that's going to come out and that'll all be fine. And it's like, really? Just, I believe it when I see it. And I will name, because it's all kind of public, but Greater Anglia have brought in some trains, and some of their stations are now step free. And we were asking on social media about access to the cafe, and the response to us was, you know, you as a wheelchair user, you won't actually be able to get the cafe, but you'll be in sight of the cafe bar, and there'll often be people around to help you. And I'm afraid my response, and a lot of other campaigners' response, was brilliant. In all our years of campaigning, that is what I was aiming for. And I did get told off for being sarcastic, but I was. It's like, you'll be in sight of the cafe bar. Yeah, well, I don't have anyone who travels with me, like 99% of the time. What am I meant to do? Stop a member of the public or just shout on? And it's things like that, that it's the big stuff is bad, yeah, but it's much easier to identify, and it's much easier to fight. The medium and the low level stuff is really difficult, because it comes down to usually one person's word against someone else's, and you know, the energy you need to fight that is quite a lot.
Wow. Tanni, do you want to put the details of the campaign or the campaign organisation into the chat? That would be really helpful, actually. I suspect a lot of people would want to sign up to that. And if my team could also put the social media handles of the panelists, that would be fantastic, so that, you know, people, this is a great group who have attended, and so let's use the momentum to take it in one way or another. So that would be great. Michelle, did you want to comment?
I want just to add to the points that both Dan and Tanni's added, and I think the fact that travel is inaccessible also impacts on disabled people's ability to engage in society. Because if you cannot access transport in all forms, whether it be aviation, whether it be bus, whatever it may be, that impacts on how you socialise. And the reason that happens is because disabled people are not thought of and valued to be valuable members to contribute to society. So therefore the transport's not made accessible. There's major problems, like if you want to socialise out with your disabled friends, you can't get on the same bus together. You cannot get in, often you can't travel together on the train because there may be only one allocated space. So there's lots of problems. I just don't want to add to the points already made, but we know what the problems are, and it's when is it going to end? Really, at what point are we going to create an inclusive transport system? Because all the topics we're talking about, they all intersect on one another. You can't talk about inclusive education without having transport, without having a number of issues. We need to stop having these conversations separately. The conversations need to go hand in hand.
Thanks, Michelle. Joanna's made a point. She says, at having 2 children in wheelchairs, we cannot go anywhere on public transport as only one wheelchair is allowed on the bus at one time. If I was not able to drive, my children's life would be very isolated. So that's a very stark reality for Joanna. Thank you for that, Joanna. Gemma, do you want to just read Amy's question from the chat, the Q&A?
Hang on. There's so many. I didn't realise there were so many. I'm trying to look in various places. But there's one thing I would like to mention that Nuki raised in the chat, and it's what experiences have the panelists had of online abuse, talking about disability, hate crime and whatever. And what changes would you like to see introduced to make it more difficult to be a victim of online abuse or disability hate crime in general?
Good question. Dan, do you want to answer that? Because you're nodding vigorously.
Yeah. I've had, well, no doubt we all have. But yeah, I've had my fair share of online abuse in time. I've had death threats. I've had accusations of things I don't really want to talk about. But yeah, it has been quite relentless at times. I don't know how you would go about stopping it, because we're always going to be out there in the public domain trying to educate the rest of society on care and disability and so forth. You find a lot of the social media giants are very slack when it comes to cracking down on this sort of thing anyway. I've seen a lot of people suspended from Twitter for marginal things, and then I've seen a lot of people who indefinitely put out a lot of hate allowed free reign to continue. So it seems to be quite erratic. It's not as if it's any policy set in stone. But yeah, I've had a lot, and still do get a lot of fair share of abuse online. I actually came off Facebook because of it. I'm now predominantly on Twitter. But the only thing we ever seem to be able to do is just mute or ban people. And that's all we ever seem to do. But you can always tell the ones who are out to abuse you, because they hide behind an avatar most of the time, or they're just doing it just to bait you. But there have been a few that have really hurt, and obviously with many others such as bipolar, if it catches you in the wrong minute, it does knock you for six. But legislatory wise, I don't know really what they can do. I think social media is too sparse and too massive to actually handle that, sadly.
You wear a lot of hats, Dan. So, you talked about death threats and serious abuse. Was this specifically in relation to the work that you do on disability then, or was it in relation to anything else?
No, a lot of it was that. A lot of it comes through. I'm learning now to stop opening my direct messages to people, but yeah, a lot of it comes from that. It can be quite damaging. Obviously, you have to shield from their family from Emily, especially. I don't ever let her know anything that comes through. There've been derogatory comments about her as well that I shield her from. I mean, Emily's very much her own independent, very strong-willed young lady, but there's no reason why she'd have to be exposed to that sort of thing. So yeah, it's just something you keep it, hold it in your hand till it burns your hand, and that's all you can really do with it.
I'm really sorry to hear that, Dan. That sounds like an awful experience. It may explain also why sometimes I've direct messaged you on Twitter and you haven't responded.
No, what it is, but predominantly a lot of the time it is just your basic troll looking just to bait you for something you've done. It's like I said, it's never anyone from the disabled community or the care community. It's just someone who just comes across your timeline and you proactively try and do something positive, and they'll just, that's it. You're just waiting to be baited, and they'll just go for it. But it does hurt. But like I said, I think the social media market is just too big to crack down on it, unfortunately.
Yeah. Tanni, you must have this a lot as well as a parliamentarian.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's hard to know which of it is because I'm tweeting about disability stuff or whether it's been a parliamentarian. So, I mean, there's definitely an issue of women in public life not being allowed to have an opinion and being shut down. I think that's a massive issue. I think, I've had some pretty bad stuff. So, the first letter you get calling you an effing idiot is kind of quite shocking, and then it gets some of it, you never ever become blasé about it, but then I've had emails saying we know where you live, watch your back, we're following you. I've had death threats, rape threats, and they are always really scary because I'm a wheelchair, as much as I used to be a Paralympian, I'm still a wheelchair. You pull me out my chair and it's hard. So you do think about where I go, what time of night, is my phone. I never leave work without my phone being charged. And it's just not. So I think there is an element, that the social media companies do need to toughen up and actually remove those threats. It's hard because the trolling and who it is, and Dan says a lot of it's hidden, but not all of it is. I've had threats from people who you can tell who they are on their timeline and what they do and stuff like that. So bizarrely, I've also had like a really creepy message from LinkedIn. So LinkedIn sorted, actually, to be fair, they sorted that out really quickly. Some guy trying to pick me up on LinkedIn. Yeah, picked up is a very nice saying for what. So no, it's not. And I've been off social media during lockdown because it's not the place. I mean, I started social media because I can rant tweet about trains and food eating on trains and watch pictures of cats. I don't find social media terribly good to have a political discussion about things because there's just not the space or the capacity to do it. But yeah, it's not good. And again, my daughter's 19, so some of it she's aware of, and some of it we try to shield. And there was one incident where she had to be protected, and it's never great when your kids are involved. It really isn't.
Yeah. Again, I'm really sorry to hear about those awful experiences, Tanni, and the measures that you have to take. It shouldn't be necessary. So I'm so sorry to hear it. And Michelle, just before I come to you, I just wanted to read out something that was sent in to us along this theme. It's quite heartbreaking, actually, from Alan. Thank you, Alan, if you're in the audience. I really appreciate you sending in your audio submission. This is something that Alan added at the end of his submission. He said, while I was going to the shops, a car stopped next to me and said, people like you should have been killed when you were born. So Michelle, do you want to comment on the social media aspect and any other hatred that you have experienced?
First of all, I'm really sorry about the experience Dan and Tanni's had in terms around social media and any other disabled person as well. And I think just being born or having an impairment, you're exposed to the most awful treatment and attitudes and whatever it may be as a disabled person. So what the story you just told us is, it should be uncommon, but it's not. For many, these are day-to-day experiences, and they come from a place, and I keep going back to it. They come from a place, the fact that we live different lives. Many disabled people are segregated, and many non-disabled people have not had the experiences of having communications or relationships with disabled people. And many disabled people are devalued in society. We are shut off from society. And we've seen this, it played out in COVID. We see how we were the most disadvantaged and always the hardest hit in any form of pandemic, any form of crisis. We get the worst treatment, and then that gives permission. Even look at the language, extremely vulnerable, we were defined as. So it gives people permission to treat disabled people badly and disrespectful. So it's really, really painful when you hear stories like that. I think many of us who are disabled is our panels and panelists would have experienced these things. And a lot of the stuff you push to the back of your head if you can. There's no, I've had my own dose of it. There's not a day that doesn't go by that you don't have some sort of dose. And what happens, you start, which is really bad, you start measuring it. Oh, that wasn't as bad as yesterday. That wasn't as bad as this afternoon. And you learn to navigate. Tanni said something earlier, being in lockdown, you realize how much you navigate and push back the idiots. And it's so true. That is what you do. You learn skills of how to navigate through the rubbish on a day-to-day basis. The moment you leave your front door, you have to navigate that. And that comes from segregation. When you segregate people, you create hierarchies in society of who's in and who's out, who's valued, who's not valued, who we should respect and who we shouldn't respect. And
Michelle, we've had comments in the chat, one from Diane saying that is shocking, and Hannah saying, I'm so sorry to hear of these experiences. And I really think that tonight, you know, you've been able to spell out to some extent just how awful this is. I mean, to get this daily, I'm sitting here horrified, even though I've had these, you know, experiences shared with me over the last few weeks. I'm continually shocked at what I'm hearing.
Sorry to interrupt. I was 5 when the first person stopped me in the street and asked me why my parents hadn't aborted me. Like 5, I'm having to have that. My mum was brilliant. I mean, and so, you know, I've lost count of the number of times just random people come up and say, oh, if I was like you, I'd kill myself. Oh, so I've had a very privileged life through education and sport and parliament, and you think my life is bad? Wow. And I've only just, no, I mean, what you actually kind of want to turn around and you can't do it because you don't know the emotional place that person's in and why they're saying it. And it's very complicated. You go, actually, I think my life's better than yours, but you can't do that. But yeah, I mean, it's, I bet every single disabled person who's part of this will have had something similar.
Yeah.
So,
No, I agree. And I think, excuse me for buttoning again, I think a lot of this problem does lie with tabloid media and things like that, who perpetually have been painting over the years disabled people as you know, living a life of luxury and benefits. They're taking your benefits. You know what I mean? It's just the media stereotype of the image of a benefit scrounger. Oh, carers, I've been told as a carer, oh yeah, you must be lucky with your free car and widescreen TV. All this stuff still goes on. And until there's a real sea change of stereotypes in the media itself, this unfortunately is perpetually going to keep happening. And Michelle was right, with segregation is only making this worse. Integration is the way to go. Integration and understanding.
Dan, you're actually addressing a question Amy's put into the Q&A, which was about the way that the media are reporting on COVID. So can you just comment on that briefly? We've only got about 10 minutes left.
Yeah.
And I've got to wrap up. But yeah, comment on how the media and how it reports on disability in general.
Well, it would be nice if it did report. And the stats and the figures I've been quoted or been coming through the Disability News Service, or just the odd thing through the Guardian with the brilliant Dr. Francis Ryan picking up on it. Other than that, I've not seen it anywhere noted at all within the death figures itself. But the disabled community has been proportionally hit by this, awfully hit by this, and no one's talking about it. You're talking about 60% of COVID victims having a disability, be they old and now we know children as well. That's just abhorrent. These are real living people with potential that have died. And they're not being talking about it. Like I've been trying to push this conversation to the media, what we're talking about the last 3 weeks, and no one's wanted to know. All people want to talk about is peers, and that's it. No one wants to talk about disabled people who have lives, who have potential, who have loves, who want to do stuff, but they have been robbed due to this pandemic. No one wants to talk about it, and it makes me so angry.
And Wayne has said in the chat, I've had this from my biological mum. She said to my dad that I had died at birth. Wayne, I'm so sorry. Thank you for sharing that. But, you know, for those who don't know about these experiences, this is very heartbreaking. So I hope that this is, you know, of benefit to those who perhaps haven't experienced this or aren't aware of the difficulties that disabled people face on a daily basis. And the level of this is just awful if you look at the chat. Michelle, go ahead.
I think it's important because the message that I'm trying to make is that it's not disabled people life is the problem. It's been created by society, and it is a political issue. It can stop. It really can stop. So being a disabled person is not a sad person. It's not sad. It's not a sad issue. It's the external factors that are creating a problem. I want to that message here.
Yeah, good point. Somebody, I can't remember your name. I saw it in the chat. Somebody said that they cannot fathom how somebody would even begin to behave like this towards disabled people, and they were talking about, you know, what is going on in their minds. So yeah, absolutely, point taken, Michelle. I just wanted to very quickly touch on benefits, if I may. Tanni, can I come to you? I know Simon wrote into us, and so did Christopher. Simon was talking about PIP, and Christopher referred to the DLA, which may be an outdated term, but Christopher, for example, was talking about the fact that he's 76 years old, he has arthritis, a disabled left arm, he needs to move some furniture, and he says there is no one to help him. I'm paid DLA of about £22 a week. It's insufficient to pay removal companies. And then we've also got Simon, who talks about having a lifelong condition that won't improve. He faces a benefits review every 18 months, which causes him extreme anxiety. He feels that he's stuck in a system that penalizes any attempt to get better or to live independently. Have you got any comments on benefits in general, Tanni?
Yeah, I mean, I worked on the welfare reform bill, and I can't remember the figures off the top of my head, but it was something like 9 or 12 assessment centres weren't actually accessible for wheelchair users. Just like, I mean, and there's sort of, you know, a joke, but not a joke, that how many assessment centres have the car park quite a long way, which is actually part of the test, whether you can get into the centre or not. So I made a suggestion to the minister at the time, and I think he thought I was taking the mick out of him. I genuinely wasn't, but saying, just actually, this is one place that you could employ disabled people to work in. And there might be a lot of disabled people who don't want to work as part of the assessment process. But actually, you know, they have a bit more understanding and some empathy and can spot things and, you know, can have conversations about some of these things. I also lost an argument in welfare reform, which was sort of, I think, again, some people saw it as frivolous. So for me, I'd much rather a system which, if you give money to people, is about what they can do, but actually what you have to constantly do is prove what you can't do. And that's really, you know, I don't think that's helpful or useful. But also, you know, welfare reform, we were very much talking about terms about ultimately was deserving and undeserving disabled people, because the whole rhetoric was about giving support to the most vulnerable, but actually when you take it away from the group in the middle, then they become the most vulnerable and they don't get help. So you just go around in these circles. But also we fought really hard for DLA not to be changed to PIP, because I mean, I'm not a huge fan of disability living allowance, but it better expressed what it was, the term, where personal independence payment makes it sound like you get this massive chunk of money and it allows you to live an independent life with however you spend it, whether it's ad hoc support or personal support, whatever it is. And actually that's just nonsense, but it just sounds really nice. And that's where I think some of the misconceptions come, that disabled people have shed loads of money, because it's just, yeah, it's just really poor. So yeah, it wasn't, yeah, working on that wasn't happy. And then it's the unforeseen consequences. There's also stuff that came in legal aid bill, which actually made it incredibly hard for disabled people to appeal or to take cases. So the attacks come, and I kind of use that word, you know, they come in lots of different ways that just make it really hard for disabled people to live an independent life.
Thanks for that, Tanni. I'm aware we've only got 6 more minutes. Before I come to my last question, or last couple of questions, I just wanted to say thank you to my amazing back office team who are doing brilliant work behind the scenes, ensuring that this continues, even if my computer completely freezes on me. I had the spinning wheel full of many colours, and so I gave up and decided to turn my laptop, turn it off and on again, which, as you know, is the stock answer for most IT experts. So thank you to all of them, and also to everyone who sent in questions and submissions in writing, by audio and video. I wonder if my team could put a link to the YouTube channel that people can click onto so that they can look at all these brilliant submissions. And if anybody still wants to continue sending them in, please do so. We're going to upload them and hopefully do something with all of this material that we have just had pouring into us. It's been quite amazing. So thank you to them. And also, you know, thank you for sending in all of those submissions. I have been blown away by how much interaction I've had. In fact, out of all of the projects that I've run, this has been the one that's generated the most interest and input. It's been quite amazing. So thank you for that. So I just wanted to address very quickly, Robert has put into the chat, how do we begin to fix this? And I wonder, Michelle, if you could, we've covered so many different topics, but have you got any solutions that spring to mind on one particular topic that's on your heart?
Yeah, it's simple. We need the government to implement the UNCRPD, UN Convention on the Rights of Disabled People, into our domestic law. It's not that this government hasn't got money. As one of our committee, Joe Whittaker, says, he says we're a rich country and it's not about a shortage, it's about a political will. The money's there, We need to stop resourcing it in segregated resources and put the money into supporting inclusive resources and making sure people can be part of society. So in simple words, we want the implementation of the UN Convention on the Rights of Disabled People in full force implemented in law. We can't wait another 10 years. We want it done now.
Thanks, Michelle. That was very succinct and a great call to action. Well done. Dan, how about you?
Well, I think firstly, we need more proactive government, but I would say I'm utterly ashamed the Minister for Disabled People at the minute, Justin Tomlinson, been no-show throughout all of this. Was just, in my opinion, carer's opinion and the disabled families' opinions that I've talked about, just shows the actual level of tolerance that him and his unit have for this community. Having been exponentially hit by COVID and everything else that's going on around the community, he's not been signed or heard of him. I think we need a disability unit that's run by a disabled person to start with and staffed with disabled people, like Tanni says, who have real life experience. I think we also need a care minister separate from the social care department to look after carers. But these people really need to start to be more proactive with those they are deemed to represent. They are supposed to represent us. Let's see some representation. And yes, Michelle was right. Let's get that enacted as well. Inclusion is not a delusion. It's easy enough to accomplish if everyone just will get their head around it and start working. It's not a hard thing to do. Disability practice is not difficult. It's legislation and dusty old white men that make it difficult.
To those people, by the way, thank you, Dan, for that. To those people who are disappearing off, I haven't actually finished, so you need to stay because I have got one last question to ask everybody. But Dan, I have to say, regarding all those jobs that you've just created there, I think we've got 3 brilliant people who could fill those. So I hope somebody is watching who makes those decisions. Gemma, did you have anything that you thought of that came to mind?
Oh, there's been lots. I apologise for asking the question about disability hate crime. But there's one thing that I thought was quite a good question, and it was in the Q&A from Kerry. What is the one most positive thing that I can tell my disabled twins about being disabled now in Britain today, in spite of all the hard work that has to be done about inclusion and access and all the rest of it? What's the most positive thing you can, if you could talk to twins of say 3, 5, 7, I don't know how old Kerry's children are, what was the most positive thing you would say about being disabled in Britain?
Tanni, can you take that one?
Sorry.
No, I mean, it's for me, my life as a disabled person, I've faced far less discrimination than most disabled people I know, and that's because of being in sport and being an athlete. So you know, I think there are positive things in terms of you can have really good people around you, and you know, it's not what people assume it to be, and there are difficult times, but you know, it's not all really tragic and sad, and it's a really difficult one to answer because of, you know, I guess where I'm sitting and some of my friends and colleagues who are sitting who are disabled. But I think being disabled has made me the person I am. You know, it's been such a big part of who I am and helped me get where I am. And I know that's not true for everybody, but I think it's important that what I would like to see is more disabled people coming together and campaign in the way that we maybe did in the 90s, and except it's quite hard because the trains aren't accessible. So, you know, somebody said to me, oh, why don't you all go protest in London? Well, it'll take us a week to get there. But, you know, now we've got stuff like this. For me, I think it's a point where we can pull people together to fight the different campaigns. And so I think I'm more, although the last year's been depressing, I'm more excited by the last year in disability rights campaigning just because of the different voices. And I'm just trying to see, somebody said, yeah, Sam, I'm going to nick this. You know, it'd be a boring place where we're all the same. And I think what we need is just recognition that people are different. I think that's true. So that's a really rubbish answer, but it's such a hard one because everyone's experience, not all our experiences of being disabled are the same. So for me, it's been a positive thing, not a negative thing, and it's helped me fight. But you know, that's not true for everyone.
Thank you for that, Tanni. Just before I share a couple of comments that were great from the chat, I just wanted to thank you panelists and all of those who've been involved, the sign language interpreters, the transcriber. I can't see if the captions have been appearing on the screen because I don't have the same visuals as the audience, but I hope that it's happened because Louise has been working really hard behind the scenes. And Gemma, you've been a brilliant co-chair. Within 5 minutes you had to take over, and I didn't even plan that with you. So and
can I just say one thing to that,
yes,
that lady with her twins?
Yes.
You've got every reason to be hopeful because Generation X is coming. Emily's generation and her generation, they've got more access to social media at an early age than they ever have before. They can see everything that's wrong with the country. Emily won a National Diversity Award. She did it through campaigning off her own back. This generation of children, regardless of how they communicate or access this world, are going to grow up more passionate than any other generation before it. They have the world at their fingertips. They can access social media. They can build communities. They can build all this stuff. So I'll say to her, this generation, your twins, will grow to be incredible human beings who will make that change. All these children that are growing up now will link up, they will do it. The power is in this next generation. Us dusty old crones will be out of it. Those children, no, I mean it. This is the generation that's going to actual access change. They're going to, we are just the sparks that light the flame. They are going to be the flames, so have no worries. But for her, from Mum's point of view, seek out your communities online. Seek out other carers communities. Seek out me, talk to Tanni. But this generation will be the one, trust me. Your children are brilliant. All these children are brilliant.
Can I come in quickly and just say, speaking to a young disabled person now, I would say contact your local disabled people's organisation, join a campaign and use your skills or whatever it is to make a difference for tomorrow, and you will be part of that history and part of that struggle.
Brilliant, thank you. And Dan, who could ever tell that you were an extrovert? Dan was the only one in the green room who, yes, all of that. So thank you to all of the speakers and all the people who sent in questions. Thank you very much. Hopefully we'll be able to capture all of this, and you, the audience, you've been amazing. Just before I wrap up, because I know I've got probably 60 seconds to go. Various people advised me in preparing for this webinar, and I just want to say thank you to all of you, Sal, Celia, David, Azim, and many others who I won't name, but you know who you are. Thank you so much for everything that you've done. I just wanted to flag what Diane has said, which is her encouragement was to say to disabled people everywhere, you can do anything. And David, who was one of the people who advised me, said, yes, I can do anything except that I can't hear. So I just wanted to end on that note and to say thank you to everyone. We will end the event by me pressing a button saying leave, so it will be a clear stop, but it's been brilliant. And I think this conversation could go on for 10 more webinars. So hopefully we covered many, many different topics, but please keep sending your information, submissions, etc. in, and we will see where we can take it. And is it okay, speakers, if people, members of the public, can contact you? Would
yes,
that be all right?
Absolutely, absolutely, yes.
Okay, brilliant. And I know that there are people who are very involved in campaigning who are attending this, so hopefully we'll find a way to link people up. But thank you everyone for being here. It's been a brilliant evening and we've learned so very much.